Your phone is face down on the nightstand. Somewhere inside it, an alarm is set for 6:40. You didn't build it. You didn't wind it. You've never once checked whether it's going to work, because it always does. Now, take it away. Same bed, same dark room. The job still starts at 6. No phone, no clock on the wall, no glow from anywhere. It's 1850. The sun will get there eventually. Your shift starts before it does. So how do you wake up? It sounds like a small problem. It isn't. Sleep through and nobody sends a warning. You lose the shift and the wage with it. In some mills, you lose the job that same morning. So you do the only thing that works. You pay a man to come and hit your window with a stick. That's not a strange footnote from the edge of history. That was the system in the biggest cities on Earth for well over a century.
And how you woke up said exactly what you earned. Because the answer isn't one thing. It changes every few hundred years, and it changes with your income. We're going all the way back, then walking forward. Ancient China and a burning candle. A king with drought problem. Medieval England and a man singing in the street. A Georgian church with a paid stick wielder in it. A Massachusetts cotton mill. Victorian Manchester at 4 in the morning. Omaha, Nebraska, where somebody patented a bed that throws you on the floor. And a factory in Connecticut that quietly ended all of it. Same question the whole way down. Who's going to wake you? And what does it cost? And at the very end, the part nobody thinks to ask. The man who woke the whole street? How did he wake up?
For most of human history, the answer to how you woke up is badly, and not on purpose. You had the sun and whoever else was in the room. That's the whole toolkit. It works while the job is task-shaped. The cow gets milked when the cow needs milking. Then there's the animal everybody brings up, the rooster. The rooster is real, and it's better than it looks. In 2013, Takashi Yoshimura's lab kept roosters under constant dim light. The birds went on crowing at dawn. There was no dawn. The timing was coming from inside them. So it's a genuine clock, and a bad one. Their internal day runs short of 24 hours, so it drifts, and any passing light sets it off early. In a group, the top-ranking bird crows first, so the rooster that wakes you isn't the one that woke up. It's the one with seniority. The night itself was a different shape. Roger Akirch argued in his 2005 book At Day's Close that pre-industrial Europeans slept in 2 goes. A first sleep, an hour awake in the dark, then a second sleep. He found it across hundreds of diaries and court records. Niall Boyce, writing in Medical History in 2023, calls the evidence fragments. If you were already awake in the middle of the night, you didn't need waking. You needed telling what time it is. So, what time is it? For most of history, that was a luxury good. And the answer was on fire. Candle clocks are ancient and clever. You mark a candle in bands and let it burn down through them. A Chinese poem by Yu Zhanggu from the year 520 describes exactly that. Alfred the Great used marked candles, according to his biographer Asser. A poet and a king. Neither of them is getting up for a shift. And now the version you've actually heard. A candle with a nail pushed into the wax. The flame burns down, the nail drops into a metal dish, and that clang is your alarm. Go looking for where that comes from, and there's nothing underneath it. Wikipedia's own article covers China, Japan, and Al-Jazari in detail and never mentions a nail. Neither does the Antiquarian Horological Society. What's out there is listicles citing each other. So the candle version stays a story people tell until somebody produces a source. But the mechanism is real. It's just the wrong material and the wrong country. Chinese incense clocks burned a marked stick or spiral at a known rate. And if you needed waking, you hung a small weight on a thread across the mark for your hour. The fire creeps along and burns through the thread. The weight drops into a brass basin, and the noise gets you up. We have that from a witness. Gabriel de Magalash was a Jesuit who built clocks for the Chinese emperor.
He described people setting exactly this: a weight released by a burning thing landing in a metal dish. That is the story everyone tells about the candle. It just happened in China with incense centuries earlier. All of this is centuries before the factory bell, and all of it only tells you the time. The first man paid to wake you turns up in 1285. Waking you is not his job. England formalized the night watch with the Statute of Winchester that year. Every town kept men on the streets after dark. By the reign of Charles II, they'd picked up a nickname, the Charlies. The work was fire, crime, and walking drunks home. It also accidentally makes him something else. He walks a fixed route, on a fixed schedule, all night, in the dark. That makes him the one man in the parish who reliably knows what time it is. So he sells it. He calls the hour as he walks, usually with the weather thrown in. An English traveler passing through Nuremberg wrote down how it sounded. Every evening, a fellow goes up and down the street singing, gives notice of the time of night, and bids people put out their candles. 2 public services in one voice: what time it is, and stop burning the town down. Wake at 3 in the morning in 1700, and you don't check anything. You lie there and wait for a man to sing at you. And a man with a route and a voice has an obvious sideline. Judith Flanders describes it in her History of Victorian London. For a few extra pennies, the same watchman would call at a fixed list of houses before dawn and rouse whoever had paid him. That's the whole trade, 4 centuries before it has a name. Nobody specialized in it yet because not enough people needed it. By the 1700s, there's a job whose entire purpose is hitting sleeping people. It's in a church. English parishes employed a sluggard waker, one parishioner paid whose whole task during the service was to watch the congregation. Anyone nodding off got tapped sharply on the head. He carried a pole, a long straight stick of stout local wood, and the tip told you you're standing. Some were finished with a brass knob, some with a fork, either carved in or grown that way, and some had a foxtail on the end. The brass and the fork were for the men. The foxtail was for the women. Peter Hampson Ditchfield wrote the job down in 1907 in a book called The Parish Clerk. He caught it just as it was passing out of living memory. It sounds like a joke about the English. It isn't only English. Zen monasteries use a flat wooden stick called the kisaku for the same problem, a sharp strike on the shoulder for a meditator who's drifting. A man is paid to be awake. His job is to carry a stick over to a sleeping person and touch them with it. That's all of it. 400 years after the Watchman, nobody has improved on a man with a stick. And there's a reason nobody bothered. Think about who needs waking in 1700. A baker, a fisherman, a servant who's woken by the household anyway. Everyone else gets up when the light does because the work waits for the light. You don't need an alarm industry when almost nobody has an appointment. That happens around 1780, and a machine causes it. For most of history, work was task-shaped. You worked until the thing was done. Harvest ran long in September and short in January, and nobody wrote that down as overtime. In 1967, a historian named E.P. Thompson described what replaced it. He called the old way task orientation. Nobody watched a clock because the work told you when it was finished. A factory doesn't run like that. A factory has a machine, and the machine turns whether you're standing at it or not. Idle machinery costs the owner money. So the day stops being a set of tasks and becomes a set of hours. And hours have edges. The edge had a sound, a bell first, later a steam whistle, and the gates shut behind it. In the mills at Lowell, Massachusetts, the workers ran their own magazine. It was called the Lowell Offering, and most of it was written by the young women at the looms. In the early 1840s, it printed a story called The Spirit of Discontent. A character in it, Ellen Collins, is explaining why she's leaving. She doesn't want to be dragged about by the ringing of a bell. Up before day at the clang of the bell. Out of the mill by the clang of the bell. Just as though we were so many living machines. That's fiction, printed under the mill owner's approving eye. The complaint got out anyway. And the bell has one flaw. It rings at the start of the shift, not before it. Getting to the bell was your own problem. This is the moment the alarm clock should arrive. It already has. That's the frustrating part. Clockwork alarms existed long before the factories did. Weight-driven and pendulum clocks got very accurate through the 1600s and 1700s, and plenty carried alarm work inside them. They were also priced like furniture. In America, Levi Hutchins said he built one in 1787 in New Hampshire. It had an extra gear that rang a bell at 4 in the morning. Take that one gently. The claim is mostly his own, and no patent was ever filed. By his own telling, you couldn't change the hour either. 4 in the morning or nothing. A machine that only works if your life starts at 4. The first patent for an alarm you could genuinely set went to a French clockmaker, Antoine Retier, in 1847. So by the 1840s, the problem is technically solved. A device exists that wakes one person at a chosen hour reliably for years. It just costs more than a mill worker has. And that gap is where the whole trade lives. For roughly 70 years, the technology to wake yourself exists and sits in the wrong houses. This isn't a story about people who couldn't figure something out. The problem was solved, on paper, in a patent office, decades before most of the people who needed it could touch one. What was missing wasn't the idea, it was the price. So the century splits in two. Afford the machine, and you buy silence. You wake up alone, and nobody outside your house knows anything about your morning. Can't afford it, and you buy a man. And a man is loud, and he arrives on the street, in front of the neighbors. So the industrial towns fill that gap with people. Thousands of them. A knocker-upper walked the streets before dawn and woke clients through their bedroom windows. The tool is the church pole. Grown up and moved outdoors, long and springy, thin enough to flex when it tapped the glass. That's how you reach a second-floor window from the pavement. Light matters more than long, by the way. You're holding it out at arm's length, in the dark, at a few hundred windows, before you've had breakfast. Some carried a soft hammer instead, some carried a rattle. Mary Smith worked London's East End with something stranger. A rubber tube firing dried peas at the glass. It sounds ridiculous. It's the best tool on the list. A pea is loud on glass, it's nearly free, and it wakes one room instead of the whole terrace. That last part is the entire business model. A man who wakes people who haven't paid him is a man being shouted at from 4 windows. And this is documented, not folklore. The job appears in the 1881 England census as an occupation. Local papers had it earlier. The Buxton Herald in 1853, the Leeds Times in 1877. It ran in Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool, London, and Poole. The prices tell you the rest. Mary Smith charged 6 pence a week. Betty McEntee, over in County Louth, took 3 old pence. Mrs. Waters could ask half a crown for a daily wake. Same act at every window. What changed was the customer. And the job had one requirement that sounds obvious and isn't. You have to be right. Not roughly right. Right. At the specific window, on the specific morning, for a person whose wage depends on it. Wake somebody an hour early and you've stolen their sleep. Wake them 10 minutes late and you've cost them a day's pay. There was no second alarm behind you. You were the alarm. That's the part the photographs never carry.
The pole and the pea shooter look comic, and they were genuinely comic to look at. But a knocker-upper was selling reliability, in the dark, in the rain, for a fee smaller than a loaf of bread.
People kept trying to build their way out of paying him. Some of the attempts are magnificent. The best is a real granted patent. In February 1900, the United States Patent Office granted number 643789 to Ludwig Ederer of Omaha, Nebraska. It's a bed. The bed pivots nearer the head end than the foot, and a spring holds it level. Release the catch, and the sleeper's own weight tips it up and drops him on the floor. No bell, no dial, the bed simply stops being a bed. And what sets it off isn't a clock. Ederer built it for hothouses and conservatories. If steam pressure in the heating pipes fell below a set level, a diaphragm dropped. The catch let go, the bed threw the man in charge of the boiler onto the floor to go and rebuild the fire. So it isn't wired to the morning, it's wired to the boiler, and that tells you what it was really for.
Nobody was protecting the sleeper. They were protecting the plants. A greenhouse full of stock dies in one cold night, so the man sleeping beside the boiler isn't resting. He's on shift, lying down. Somebody's living depended on being awake at the right moment. Until that was cheap to guarantee, whoever could afford to solve it did, one way or another. The thing that ends all of this had been sitting in a Connecticut factory for years. Seth Thomas patented a mass-produced alarm clock in America in 1876, while Mary Smith was still walking around. In 1908, West Clocks began building Big Ben, and by September 1910, it was running in the Saturday Evening Post, a national advertisement for a clock in a magazine anybody could buy. And the change isn't accuracy. The watchman was accurate. Mary Smith was accurate in the rain for years. What finally arrives is a clock cheap enough to stand in a worker's own bedroom. It does the job every night for one payment, and it never asks for 6 pence again. Knocker-uppers saw it coming and said so out loud. In 1914, The Guardian printed it flat. The cheap American clock, they wrote, is killing the industry. A national newspaper reporting the tragedy that people could now afford to wake themselves up. Read that with the wages in mind.
A knocker-upper's whole living was the gap between what a clock cost and what a worker earned. Every year, the factories closed that gap a little further. And a job that exists inside a gap doesn't shrink when the gap closes. It stops existing. There's no villain in that sentence, which is what makes it uncomfortable. Nobody set out to end the trade. A factory in Connecticut got better at stamping metal, and a few thousand people in England slowly stopped being necessary. The clock never competed with Mary Smith on quality. It competed on price, and it won on price. And price was the only thing she had. It took another 50 years to finish, and the ending is the most honest part of the story. The last knocker-uppers were still working in the 1960s. Not the 1860s, the 1960s. Men with poles walking streets while other people watched television. They lasted because the poorest streets were the last ones able to buy their way out of the service. Which leaves the question the job was always inviting. Somebody has to wake the man who wakes everybody else. For once, we know. A knocker-upper named William Crompton charged 4 pence to 6 pence a week for his round. He was up at 3:45 in the morning. And he was woken by an alarm clock. He owned the thing that was killing his trade. He had to. It was the only way to be first. So that's the answer to who woke people up before alarm clocks. Other people did. A parishioner with a foxtail stick, a watchman singing the hour down an empty street, a woman firing dried peas at an upstairs window. Every one of them getting paid because being reliably awake was the most expensive thing on the street. Now, go back to the phone on your nightstand. It's set for $6.40. It costs you nothing, and it doesn't know you. It will never stand under your window on a wet Tuesday in February with a 6-foot pole. The clock didn't only make waking up easier, it made it private. For 200 years, being on time was something you bought from a neighbor, and the whole street could hear you buying it.